We're good? Cool. Awesome. Welcome back to GlasgowJS, everyone. I hope everybody had a lovely New Year and Christmas break. I'm looking forward to firing into more code this year, and hope everybody's sort of remembered how that works over the holidays. I think I sat down to do the first Scottish Technology Club bulletin, and I thought, oh, just upgrade a couple of packages before. Oh no, it's all gone wrong. And the events that I scraped, they changed the layout on the page, and it no longer worked. So yeah, spent the first day back debugging that, which was good. So if you don't know about this, so we run the Glasgow and Edinburgh meetups, and then I've also got a email newsletter called Scottish Technology Club. So that's like a kind of weekly list of all the events that I find in Scotland. So I pull all the stuff that I can get from Meetup and Eventbrite and other conferences or whatever, put it in a weekly bulletin. And then we've got a Discord chat server, so you can chat to fellow JS devs and occasionally some .NET devs as well. Weird, but okay. Yeah, there's a video library there, so we live stream on YouTube, and then afterwards Alan edits up the talk. So if you want to watch talks back in like lovely 4K with the transcripts and so on, they're up there on the website too, so you can get that. Yeah, let me know what you think about that. The other thing to say about this is in the newsletter I also feature when people write technical blog posts or do videos. Lots of people dabble in kind of blogging like that. I'd encourage you to dabble. If you've got a New Year's resolution, why not make it that? Share like what you're learning with your fellow devs. I mean, I love reading about what people in the community make, partially because it's interesting to learn about new technologies. The other thing is they're usually in the Discord server. So if I am doing something at my work and I'm like, oh, I don't know how this works, it's easy just to fire a message over, and people are usually pretty keen to help. So yeah, I'd encourage you to check that out. So we've got one speaker this evening, and that's Daniel. And I've seen Daniel speak a couple of times before, and had the pleasure of his company in the pub. So I always find whatever you talk about, it's always good sort of watching you just work stuff. So yeah, you're going to be talking about font optimization. So everybody, round of applause for Daniel. Cheers.
Thank you very much. All right, it's a pleasure to be here tonight talking about magically optimizing your fonts. So my name is Daniel, and there you go. Hi. I'm a full-time open source maintainer. So I live the dream, basically. I maintain some projects. The most well-known of them is called Nuxt, which is a framework for building full-stack web apps using Vue. I'll find out exactly how known that is in a second, because I have a poll, and you can tell me that you don't know anything about it, which will be fine. I'll just cry into my pillow at night later on. I also am on the team maintaining a framework called Nitro, which is a framework for building servers that can be deployed anywhere, so to any platform, whether that be AWS or Vercel or Netlify or wherever. I have a few small projects like pagespeed.dev and firstcommit.is, which are just fun things. PageSpeed is a client for Core Web Vitals and PageSpeed Insights that works when you share it. So you get nice little social images, and you can sort of say what your score is and stuff like that. I'm also a GDE, an MVP, and a GitHub star newly last year. That doesn't mean a great deal. The more important, you can reach me. My website is row.dev. I was extremely proud when I got that. It's one of my greatest achievements in life. And you can find out how to contact me there. So email and virtually every social network known to humanity, except I've sort of removed Twitter these days. You can find me on Blue Sky instead. But any way you want to get in touch, I'm really happy to. If there's something I can do to help you, if you've got any questions, if there's anything that you want to talk about that we didn't somehow manage to talk about in the pub afterwards, please get in contact. That is half of the fun of being an open source dev, because I get to chat and help people all over the world, and it's such a privilege when there are people closer to home that I get to hang out with. So I just live in Edinburgh. This is my cat. Proof that I do in fact live somewhere. The cat is named Barley, and she is extremely solicitous. Is that the right word? She really wants cuddles at all times, and so she's been blessed with this Mew, which is totally impossible to ignore. So she'll sit there. I am standing up at my desk, and she's starts mewing. And it doesn't matter what I'm doing. I cannot ignore that. So I have to pick her up, put her on the desk, at which point I can't do any more typing. I can think, I can review PRs, I can do some kind of spelling bee on my phone. That's acceptable to her as long as it continues with petting. I can have a phone call, like a video call, that's fine, but no more code. So that is my work-life balance. It is barley. So this is the opportunity of you to either make my day or not. No, it's actually fine if you have not used Nuxt. You might be able to, I don't know how small that is, but you might be, or whether I'm in the way as well, but you might be able to scan one of those, and if you do scan it, via the magic of WebSockets and JavaScript, the numbers come in the slide. This is such a simple integration, by the way. It's like 10 lines of code. If you haven't tried it, PartyKit is well worth trying. Or you can build your own kind of thing on something like Cloudflare's durable objects. It's quite fun. And I just want to take the opportunity, just subliminally, to say that I'm actually very clever. It's very, very important at the beginning of any talk to sort of let people know. And you see how clever I am because I've put the options here are yes and not yet. and perhaps, well, anyway, this is, by the way, this is self-deprecation. I don't actually believe it, but that's also meant to be funny, right? Okay, this is what Nuxt is for the 19 of you who haven't yet used it. It's a framework built on top of Vue, and the concept is that it's progressive. So the idea is that it starts out with best practice built in, and then as you need more customization or a functionality, it should be able to go with you and let you do whatever you need to do. So there should be no downside to using it. I only got involved at the rewrite of it, version 3. We completely rewrote Nuxt. You may have heard of Next.js before. Next.js and Nuxt were released on consecutive days. And Nuxt is the Vue version, and Next is the React version, and that's why the letter is different, Vue versus React. But we completely rewrote Nuxt in 2020. And that was basically when I was getting involved in open source. And I started leading the project in January of 2023. And we have a new major coming out this year, which is very fun. But I'm not actually going to talk about Nuxt. I just wanted to let you know that I am an important person. That is also a joke, also self-deprecation. Please believe me. But I just wanted to give you some background on what I spend my time doing most of the time. I wanted to talk about the challenge of web fonts. Who here dabbles in front-end development from time to time? So you probably know the challenge of web fonts. Because on the one hand, web fonts are not challenging. Because all you have to do is grab an embed code from a provider like Google Fonts. They give you some stuff, you paste it into your HTML, index.html or whatever, and you're done, right? Wrong. That's where the challenge starts. Because there's this my friends, the core web vitals. Anyone here know the core web vitals? I'm going to tell you about my friends, the Core Web Vitals. The Core Web Vitals was an initiative pioneered by Google, but really good for the web in general. It changes over time, both in terms of what metrics are included in this sort of the set of scores, and also in terms of what an acceptable score is. It's based on a percentage of websites and how the web as a whole is doing. So if the web gets better and better and better, what is a good score will increase, you see, or it'd be harder to get it. And they are largest contentful paint. So imagine, which is a time. So imagine you're loading your website, and you've got like a really big image that comes in. That thing, the time that image loads, is the largest contentful paint. So imagine you have everything is really fast, but then this really slow image comes in 3 seconds down the line. You'll have an LCP of 3 seconds. That is going to pull your site down in these vitals. Because this is I'm talking about the user experience. And the user experience is not that your website was fast, even if you managed to get everything else fast, fast server response, fast JavaScript, whatever. If it took a long time to download the image, it's still a slow website as far as the user is concerned. The second is cumulative layout shift, which honestly is my least, well, I mean, it's a good web vital, but it describes something that I find the most frustrating thing on the internet. So if you ever opened a website, this is often true for me on my phone. I open the website, maybe in response to an email, click here to confirm your attendance at tonight's meetup. Okay, click, because I am obedient and I obey what my overlords tell me to do. And it opens up, and there's a little button, accept. And I mash down on that accept button, but only there's a problem. As my finger comes down, a cookie banner sort of pushes the content down, and I actually click decline permanently with no right of redress, and I can't go. Right? That's the kind of thing that happens, and it might not be quite like that, but it actually is pretty much like that. That is the experience, and I think probably a lot of us feel it. And this cumulative layout shift metric describes how much, like a percentage of the page, that moves around as you're loading your page. And it's a really big deal, and it's a really good thing that there's this score that talks about what this loading experience is like, because who else is going to stand up for us in a world of tag managers and marketing departments and legal and compliance departments that inject all kinds of scripts into websites that make it terrible to interact with as a user. And there's also interaction to next paint, which is a new, by the way, do you want to know this? It's not all strictly relevant to fonts, but I think it's actually really worth knowing. So there's something called, and also Jamie told me that I had an unlimited amount of time to talk. So I'm currently going for 1.5 hours. That's what I just want to set expectations. So interaction to next paint is it's new. Until now, the core web vitals were all focused on the initial load. But actually, a lot of the experience of using a website isn't just about the first time it loads. It's actually about interacting with a website. And if we're the GlasgowJS, we have got JavaScript involved, that actually interaction is one of the things that makes websites amazing, right? JavaScript is good, but it also can be bad. It can give a bad experience if it's deployed poorly, if there's too much of it. See the aforementioned tag managers. Hotjar, I hope there's no one here who works at Hotjar. That script is one of the worst things for website performance. It's obviously recording everything you do in order to give good metrics on what's clicked and so on, but it can really slow your site down. But interaction to next paint aims to measure the experience of a user of doing something like clicking a button, clicking a link, somehow interacting with a website, and how long it then takes the browser to acknowledge that response. Now, when I say acknowledge the response, I mean like the button paints, like if you click a button and it then paints the depressed button state or the active button state, and then you let go, and then it quickly paints the sort of back to normal state, but with a focus ring. Like, that's the kind of level of stuff we're talking about. We're not saying the whole set of things that are going to happen. We're just talking about that first one. And this is a really, really important thing, because sometimes I'm going off tangent. Like, interaction to next paint was a very big deal when it was released as a core vital, because a lot of websites, including those written in Nuxt, were not prepared for it and hadn't been measuring it. And therefore, we hadn't been able to help users make better decisions about how to build sites. And in particular, if you do anything, like if you have a click handler or something, like in React, you bind something to the click event, or Vue, you can do something similar. If you say interact with your state and that triggers a re-render, then all of that is going to be blocking. It's going to stop the browser from performing any kind of response to the user, and it will give you a bad INP. We actually found that by inserting an arbitrary opportunity for the browser to respond to the user, costs something like 8 milliseconds in terms of time, but it basically gave you instantly good INP, because it said, okay, hey browser, do what you need to do to acknowledge the response, and then perform the click handler. And so if you, and I'm saying this because this is really important and it's also really easy to do. And if you're interested, I can give you a link to a really helpful tiny library for React if you're using React or Vue. It's just a tiny bit of JavaScript code. The CTO of Vercel wrote a great article about it, multi-ubi. Check it out. Your websites will immediately become more performant if you just add this in your click handlers. It's not a hack. It's genuinely valuable because what it does is it enables users to experience the feeling of having the browser respond to them before you then go ahead and do something like update the UI. So those core web vitals you can grade your site on them. Just to say that they're measured based on real user data. So if you were to go to my site, pagespeed.dev, or go to the Google site, pagespeed.web.dev, you can access a data set, which is based on real users using Chromium-based browsers. That includes stuff like Brave, Chrome, Microsoft Edge, everything but Safari and Firefox. And that also includes Android phones. Sadly, it doesn't include anything running on iOS because that's all Safari, even if it's badged differently. If you have Chrome on iOS, it's actually Safari. I don't know if you knew that, but it is monopolistic and should be stopped. But anyway, I won't rant too much. But all that data is anonymized and becomes part of a big data set, and you can actually see how your site performs on real users, the actual users who are using your website on these 3 metrics. It's really, really valuable data. It's so much better than a Lighthouse test, which is running on a lab computer. You're seeing how your site is actually performing for real users, so do check it out. But one of the things that makes your site perform worse for real users is the subject of my talk, which hitherto I have spoken about, 0.1% about, is our friends web fonts. Why? Well, web fonts download. There's a resource. There's something that has to be downloaded, which means that, and you can download this in several ways. So you have font display in CSS, which specifies how the rendering of the page should be affected by the downloading of the font. So you can block the rendering of text until the font is downloaded. And that will mean that you get something like this. Okay? We are downloading a font, and then in comes the text. It's blocked. You can also, and this is the default if you're using Google Fonts, you can also set font display swap, which is you start off by displaying a fallback font, just a native font that happens to be installed on the system, and then when the web font loads, then you swap over to that one, and it looks something like this. So you have a fallback, and then the web font loads. Now you'll notice that with both of these things that what you're seeing is cumulative layout shift. This is bad. That button start building is moving around. That is going to give you a bad result in your core web vitals, and it's going to give users a bad experience. You can also make it a little bit better by providing a fallback that's a little bit closer to the font that's going to be used. So you could get something like, it's still not that close, sorry. I deliberately chose a font that is very narrow to show an almost exaggerated version of this. It might be a bit less if you have a font that's closer. So we could see something like this. So if I pick Nunito, you can see that's a bit closer, right? But you don't always have that luxury. You might be using a font that doesn't have that. And obviously, you're limited to what the user has on their system. So there are a couple of things that people do historically to solve or improve their core web vitals when using web fonts, and particularly to reduce the layout shift, which is attributable to the extra time required to download the font. So one, that you can inline fonts as data URIs. I don't know if you know this, but you can encode any data in a href or source, anything that's a URI. And then it's a sort of a virtual thing. It doesn't have to be downloaded. It's there in the HTML. And so you can take anything from a whole picture or a whole font and make it a really long string and stick it in the HTML. And it means that the moment your HTML is there to be passed, so is the font. No delay. But it's not cacheable. So every time you redeploy your website, the user's browser can't say, hey, we have the web font already downloaded. So it's going to have to download that every single time it downloads your HTML. And obviously, it's going to make it longer to download your HTML, which there is, by the way, just FYI, from a performance point of view, if you can get your HTML under a certain amount, I think it's about 11 kilobytes, it makes the disproportionate difference to the browser in terms of the loading of your page. It's interesting. It's about fitting into a buffer. Anyway, that's quite irrelevant. You can also do something else. You can subset your fonts. This is a process which isn't allowed by the licenses of all fonts, so be careful before you do it. But it basically means, if you imagine a font has pictures of every possible letter that might be used in that font. It's not exactly how it is, but imagine that's the case. Right? Now say, hey, I only want to say, hello world. So I really do not need all the Cyrillic characters, and I definitely do not need, so let's get rid of all of that, everything but hello world. Those are the only letters that need to be there in the font. This is subsetting the font. And by default, Google Fonts will do that for character sets. So, you have your Latin, you have your Cyrillic, there's lots more. But you might also say, hey, we don't need uppercase letters, or we don't need certain, so we only need a few letters. And so you can do this, you can subset fonts. But this is very much at the level of fine-tuning. So you have a website, you really want to make it ultra-performant. This is often used for things like headings. So you have some kind of, or a logo maybe. You've got a logo and you have your sort of brand font. The brand font is only ever used to have the text of the brand. You really don't need to have the whole web font there, right? You only need that. And this is the sort of thing you might do to fine-tune something. But it's not scalable in the sense of, imagine you then change the website a little bit. You're going to have to rerun that subsetting operation, or you're going to have to automate it somehow. It starts to become a challenge on its own. Another thing people do is preload the font. So again, we're talking about this time delay between the time the website downloads and the font downloads. Now, the way that it happens is the browser is starting to get the HTML back from the server. And as it goes down the HTML, it comes to probably your CSS file. And it starts downloading your CSS. Now, in the CSS, it says, if you come across, it will have a font face rule. It says, like, hey, every time we use the super custom web font, download this URL. And the browser makes a note of it and says, I know about that. But it won't do anything. And then it will come a bit further down in the CSS, and it will see, this class, or maybe every heading, is going to have this super custom web font. And the browser says, OK. It won't do anything about it until it actually comes to render the element that has that's an H1. And then the browser will say, aha, I know what to do with this. And then it will start downloading the font. Now, this is sensible because you could have lots of CSS that's not used on your page. You could say, hey, when we have an H3 followed by a paragraph, then only on this other page, then use the font. And the browser shouldn't download it to start with. So the browser is right to do this. But maybe you know more. Maybe you know that on every page of your website, you're always going to use this font. And you can add a link, a preload link to your head and tell the browser, hey, download this right away. It's actually important. And it can be done in a non-blocking way, and the browser will download it as soon as it encounters it. So rather than having this waterfall effect of download the CSS, scan the CSS, wait until we come to a thing that matches the selector, it downloads it straight away. But that's not performant. Why? Because there often you have several different font formats. There's WAF2, there's WAF. There used to be more. These days, WAF2 and WAF are good for pretty much everywhere, but there's TTF and EOT, and there were other worse things in the past. But anyway, what do you preload? Do you preload the bold as well? Maybe it's not used on this page, but you better do that. Do you preload WAF and WAF too? You know, both? Guarantee no browser is going to use both of them. But so do you only preload the WAF too? What about the users on the older browser? Actually, there are not very many these days, who are using WAF. Well, they'll have a whole set of stuff downloaded they didn't need, and then they'll have to re-download what they do. Right? So there's some issues with preloading that mean it's typically not the thing you reach for straight away. Are you with me so far? I've not bored you. I can go back and talk about core vitals, and my cat also would be an option. OK, so there are some problems. Now, there are some solutions. So Katie Hempenius is a great software engineer. She works at Google. And she came up with a system of using font metrics to resolve this issue. And when I say resolve, I mean make, you know, we can't 100% fix it, but fix it to a huge extent. So it's possible of any font to describe it in terms of its ascent, its descent, the line gap, the size, the EM size, that's like the width of actually literally the M character in the font, and the line height in pixels at 100 pixels. So you can get these out of any font. The only one which is the ascent is like the height to which the font, the highest letter goes above the baseline. The descent is similarly, like think like H or something like that. And then you have stuff like G and Y. They have a descent that goes underneath. You've got line gap in terms of when you're rendering the font, and you have 2 lines in a row. The browser does awful things, by the way, with gaps between CSS, between text that's rendered. That's being fixed amazingly. But up to now, if your designer has told you to render some text and you've tried to do that in a browser, you will have been extremely frustrated because it doesn't line up. And if you select the text, like, well, what's going on here? Like that, there's no way that text is centered in the. Anyway, there's a great tool called Capsize, which I'll tell you a little bit more about in a moment, which basically uses these font metrics to eliminate that. And so you just have text rendered exactly to its top and bottom. But I don't want to get ahead of myself. So Katie noticed that you could actually use these metrics that could describe any font. The M size is the only one which is a bit variable, because obviously the M and an I, will be very different widths. So that is an average. It's sort of saying across the font, the character width, we could have an average width. So it can be accurate in aggregate, but not in any specific case, like a single letter. But we can actually use some CSS properties, size adjust, ascent override, descent override, and line gap override, to force, like bed of Procrustes style, to force any fallback font that you already have on your system into the shape of the custom web font that is going to load. That's cool, right? So, because if you can express it in just these 4 values, then that's not a whole font. That's not going to require, that's just a bit of CSS you can put in. And then you can say, well, let's sort of squish Arial into the shape of Oswald, or whatever you're using, so that it matches. And then you get something which isn't so bad. You produce some CSS that looks a little bit like this. You have to there's a calculation for it. But you can come up with, it depends basically what your custom font is. And based on that custom font, you can then create some CSS that will apply to any fallback to squish it into that shape. So this is what it looks like. So just to remind you, this is what it looks like without it. Okay, so if we then enable the CSS override, it looks like this. That's pretty cool, right? I mean, obviously, it's still Shift, it's still a different font, but do you see the same height, the same width? Like, that's acceptable, right? Suddenly, you're not having buttons flying around the page. you're having what is a shift, but it's an acceptable shift because font has changed, not the kind of shift that makes users tear their hair out. So that's fine. What could we do with that? I could tell you all, and we could all go home, go to our websites with our custom fonts, and calculate it out. So you just have to remember, every time I'm in a project, I have to do some division and multiplication. I'm going to paste the magic CSS in the page, and it's going to achieve a good result for me. That's not great. One, everybody needs to know. It quickly becomes outdated. The moment you change your web font or whatever. So Capsize, the project I mentioned earlier, actually happened to have these metrics anyway for the purposes of making text more... No. It was a good moment. For the purpose of making of text more aligned to the way a designer would think about it. So I thought, why not use this to come up with a build plugin that will work in any project, any bundler, and inject the CSS for you automatically. So I used a tool called unplugin, which we actually built as part of building Nuxt, but which is used in now far beyond Nuxt. It's created by Anthony Fu. Do people know Anthony? He's an open sourcer as well. And the idea is that it allows you to write build plugins that work in any framework. So Webpack, Rollup, Vite, ESBuild, RSPack, Rolldown, Farm, anything, as long as it has a plugin API, unplugin can sort of fit in with its API to allow you to author your code transform plugin in a consistent way. So you get everything for free, basically. So using unplugin, that's just an example of how it works. We created something called Fontaine, which you can see in the unJS GitHub org. unJS is a GitHub org with projects that started as part of the rebuilding of Nuxt, that we wanted to put somewhere that had nothing to do with Nuxt. Because we're not particularly interested in building the empire of Nuxt. We're interested in building stuff that we work on with other people together in a cross framework, usable by anyone, usable anywhere kind of way, because that's what open source means to me. It's not about, it's about sharing, it's about collaborating, and it's about giving. And so anyway, Fontaine can be used, and it exists. You can drop it into your project, and it will automatically generate the data by pulling the stuff from Capsize. And I'm pretty sure it detects if you have the reference to a font family in your CSS, that's all that's required. It will inject the font face for the fallback, just magically, automatically for you. And I thought, actually, there's an opportunity to do something a little bit more here. Because it's not just about optimizing the CSS for the layout shift. Actually, a lot of what we're trying to do when we're using custom web fonts is tied to these font CDNs. Google. It's not only Google. There are plenty of others as well, from Adobe to, well, there are lots. My mind's gone blank. There are lots of them. I promise you there are lots. If you go to Unifont, I list out some of them. And Bunny, I think, is one. There's FontShare, FontSource. Those are all CDNs or open source projects. So actually, let's create an agnostic way of getting font URLs, CSS, from these CDNs, because they all have different APIs and different ways of getting data from them. And whenever anyone starts to build some kind of font integration at the framework level, they end up having to rewrite the code to grab some data from Google or from Adobe or from FontSource. So I created Unifont, which allows, it's a very low-level thing. You basically instantiate it, you pop in the providers that you're interested in, and then you just query it. Hey, I want to look up Poppins. And it will go away, iterate through the list of those providers, and say, hey, yeah, we got some data from Poppins. Here's some URLs to the fonts. These URLs match these weights and these subsets. Anyway, it gives you some stuff back. And then with those two projects, I built something called Nuxt Fonts. And the idea is that it should totally abstract away. And I'm not here to talk about Nuxt, but to prove it, I'm actually working with two other frameworks to build exactly the same kind of thing for them. So if you're using Quick, they're going to be using exactly these libraries, Fontaine and Unifont, and do exactly what we've done here. And Astro are looking to do the same thing as well. So this is how it works on the Nuxt level. We have this is a Vue component. Now, I love Vue, by the way, because it's so close to HTML, the languages of the web. Vue has a template bit, which is HTML, and it is all actually valid HTML. It has a style block, if you want, which can be CSS, if you are not using Tailwind, which you obviously can. And you can also have a script block, which has your JavaScript sort of reactive data side of things as well. But particularly Nuxt Fonts only really looks at the CSS. And the moment it sees that you have a font family, it notices, haha, you're using Poppins. By the way, I really like Poppins. All the typographers I know tell me it's terrible. But I really like it. I'm sorry, I just wanted to say that. So anyway, Poppins, you're using Poppins. Do you know Poppins? It's great. Look it up. It's amazing. It's a really nice, bold headline font. It's just going to, it says, hey, I'm Poppins. And that's it. So it takes that and transforms it and says, OK, we're going to add this fallback. And it basically adds it to the font family line. And what this means is the browser basically goes through this list of fonts, and it displays the first one it can until it can swap up to a more preferred one. So normally, if you had something like just Poppins sans serif, the browser would say, hey, I don't know anything about Poppins, but I do happen to have a sans serif font called Arial, or whatever it is, and it will display the text in that. In this case, it can't yet display with Poppins because by the time it sees this, it hasn't downloaded the font, so it's going to fall back to Poppins fallback Arial. We then generate some CSS. Both for Poppins, we use Unifont to grab the URL from, to the font on Google. We download that locally into your project and then cache it in your project. So we generate the CSS then to point to your local font. By the way, I haven't even mentioned why you would do this. You do this because no third-party requests. Now it's part of your project. There's no issues of user privacy from people hitting Google. And by the way, if you ever have heard the idea of using a CDN because it speeds things up, not valid anymore. Unfortunately, it used to be that you could have a CDN for shared resources like fonts, and if a user had ever used that CDN before on any website at all, they would get instant loading on your website because their browser would have it cached. Sadly, some people use this as a way to fingerprint people and track them. Because if you've served a resource to someone before, you can tell how quickly it loads. If you can tell that it loaded quickly, then you know that they went to a website that had it before, right? So immediately you can start to see how people might use this to build a user tracking system. So browsers, in order to protect user privacy, disabled caching across origins. So you can't, therefore, access the cache of, say, a Google font loaded on one website from another website. Good for user privacy, but also this is why we can't have nice things. And so now there's no real reason to have a CDN for this sort of thing. It also requires you have an additional DNS resolution of the Google server. It requires that you start an additional connection. If you are all on one origin, your browser can benefit from pipelining. So it basically keeps a connection alive and just sort of keeps on getting stuff from it. It doesn't have to instantiate a new one. We could go into TCP/IP, and that would be quite fun, but let's not do that. That would be a bad idea. We can talk about it later at the pub. But anyway, so there are lots of benefits associated with having it all on your own domain, including privacy. By not making any requests to a third party, you don't have any opportunity. And Google Fonts in particular was ruled by at least one European court as not compatible with user privacy. Google disagree with that. They say they're not tracking anybody through Google Fonts. But it's also about compliance, and you can guarantee that there's no issues if you're hosting everything locally. So it does that for the actual Poppins font, but then it also generates the fallback. that I was talking about. And for this, it doesn't use unifont, it uses fontaine to generate the CSS. So all of this is done for you automatically. Ooh, hello, that was very quick to the end. So I want to show you how that actually works. If you're still with me, do you want to see it? Yeah, you don't have to see it. You won't offend me. I mean, a little bit, but mostly not. Okay, excellent. Emotional blackmail continues to work. So if you start a new website, a new Nuxt website, I use PNPM. Any other PNPM fans? Oh, it's so good. If you haven't used it, do. It's very fast. So let's install the dependencies. We'll initialize the Git repo, and we'll fire up our Nuxt app. A bit small. I'm going to start the dev server and fire that up in the browser. Okay, so this is our basic Nuxt website. It's a very simple kind of thing. It's got its app, which is what we, hey there. And we might want to put we need to install our fonts integration. So I'm going to open the Nuxt DevTools. It's a bit small, sorry. I'm going to open the Nuxt DevTools, and it's got a lot of stuff that lets you, oh yes, I'm going to need to authorize it. Otherwise, anybody on the local network with me would be able to run stuff on my computer. But okay, it's authorized now. I'm going to install the module, and I'm just going to go to modules. Nuxt modules enable lots and lots of different features from UI libraries to, and you can write your own. In this case, I just want to install the fonts module. And it's going to install it, and then it's also going to add it to the modules in my Nuxt config file. It's going to do that in the background. So actually, if I were to open up my DevTools, you'll see, it's actually already done it. OK, so fonts module is installed. There it is. And now I can actually write something that's something like root font family Poppins. And I don't know if you can see it. It's a very, make it a bit bigger. But you see, well, you see that this is Poppins, right? So the font is being loaded as promised from the fonts underscore. So that Google font has been proxied to my local computer and is being installed. You also see that there is a very, very slim switch. And that actually tells you that it's being adapted. The fallback font on my computer had the right CSS generated to match this. And it's a bit tricky to see. It's very tricky to see. Let's try here. I might just need to show you in the DevTools. Fonts has its own DevTools panel. So you can see that the Poppins font is being used. And you can also see the Google fonts that were identified and the CSS that was generated as well. So different ones from italic to regular and regular italic have been injected. And I could also, do stuff like disable Google and I could say no more Google. And it will actually still work, I think, because I'm pretty sure that Poppins is also provided by Bunny, which is another provider. And so we'd be able to do exactly the same kind of stuff. Right. I guess I thought that might take longer, but it seems to be faster, which I guess is good, right? Now, I just want to say why. Why do this? So obviously, because we can. And that's why I don't know about you, but that's why I do a lot of things. Because it's fun to try it out and see if it works. But more importantly, I think this is why frameworks exist. To take the responsibility away or the need to do something away. So doing everything that we talked about, so downloading stuff locally, generating CSS, hosting it in your own project rather than a third party, even locating the source for the font that you want to use. This is stuff that gets out of date very quickly. Imagine you downloaded and stuck some CSS in for one font, you add another web font in the course of developing the project, and then you deploy it. It now has an outdated font, which still is going to be in your code, and 3 months down the line, corporate tells you they want a different one. You know, that kind of thing very quickly adds up. Well, if we automate it, we remove the need of people to stay on top of things. We also make it possible for people who don't know anything about how this works to benefit from it. So all of us know about Katie Hempenius's amazing work because somebody told us about it. And that's great, but what about the people who don't know? Is the objective to just tell more and more people about how to create these CSS overrides? I mean, there's only so much brain space that we have. Isn't it better to build these things in so you benefit from them at the base level and you don't even need to think about it? That's a philosophy that drives a lot of what I do. We try and find out. We don't always know. We sometimes get it wrong. But at the framework level, we try and figure out what can we do to make better choices so people don't necessarily have to know how this works. And then if they do and they want to customize it, they can do that, of course. But hopefully, it's a higher starting point to start from. And I think, anyway, and it's cool, right? I think it's cool. If you're interested at all in anything I've talked about, because Jamie's been to give me a gimlet eye, and you know, he's sort of thinking that the hour and a half thing was not a joke. But if you want to, feel free to check out the docs on nux.com or fonts.nux.com, and you can find out a little bit about the project. If you want to contribute, by the way, to Unifont or Fontaine or anything, or if you have a good idea for something it should do that it doesn't do, please open an issue. I would love to see that. And if you want to, make the change, I'd also love that too. That would be great. If you're interested in Nuxt, you can join our Discord server where you'll find me there, and as well as a lot of other nice people. Oh, and one more thing. I have an open diary at row.dev/chat. It's not much. It's a 10-minute chat, but you feel free to book it. I would love to talk if there's ever anything I can do to help. Particularly if you want to get involved in open source. Maybe not Nuxt, but some other project would be equally good. And particularly if maybe you'd like to be involved, but you're not sure whether you'd be welcome, or you're not sure whether you feel like you might be not quite like the people in the project already, and you're not sure whether they'd be glad to have you there. I can tell you now that I would love to have you in any project I'm involved in. Sometimes saying that in person means a lot more than just saying it in the generic sense. But if there's any advice or help I can give, please book a call. I would love to chat. And that's it from me. Thank you very much for having me tonight.
Thank you, Daniel. That was really great. I really like how I think whenever I see you speak about your work, it feels like a craft, as well as, I think sometimes, in code, you're churning out stuff, for companies and so on. But actually, quite a lot of this comes down to really caring about the details and making it easier for other people, and that always comes through in your work. Are you okay for taking some questions? Yeah. Do people have any questions? Cool, right. This mic is for the live stream, so if you can speak into mic, you're not amplified, but it helps people at home. So.
Thank you very much for that talk, Daniel. It was excellent. One of my thoughts is we had fallback fonts because we had that delay in downloading the fonts from a CDN, which you say now is irrelevant. If we have the font locally downloaded at the beginning, and particularly if we have subset fonts as well, surely we don't need a fallback font. Surely we can just go load, because one of the things that's really irritating to me is to see the jitter changing fonts. Wonder what your thoughts are on that.
So hosting the font from the same origin will make a difference. It will be faster to load, assuming you have a CDN on your own site, which most providers do. You deploy to Vercel, Netlify, AWS, whatever. But we're assuming you have a CDN in place. But it doesn't totally eliminate it. And there's a good reason for that, which is that letting the browser be in charge of whether the font is used on the page with a selector on the page is still a good thing, because it stops all the fonts from being downloaded, and then just makes it based on usage. In Nuxt, we do go a bit further. We know, so Vue tracks usage of every component. So we can say, with a great deal of certainty, whether a given component is used on the page, as in, sorry, not a great deal of certainty. We know that the component is used when it's rendering the HTML on the server, which means we can actually add the link in the head to tell the browser about it, because we know that that is the case. So we can do a little bit more, but you're right, and there's still going to be the swap, the download. The only way I think to get rid of that is to preload the font, with the downsides of preloading, making choices. I think if you do want to preload the font, Nuxt Fonts does support that. You can enable it by saying, I've made it experimental for now. I think I made it experimental because, oh, maybe it isn't. For goodness sake, it must be here somewhere. I'm pretty sure I've made it experimental. Oh, I actually make it, you have to pick it on a per font basis. So because I'm worried about what it might do to performance, it can be a foot gun. If people say they want to preload and they end up over preloading. So imagine, for example, you have your regular, your italic, and your bold, and then your bold italic. That's 4 fonts, 4 font faces, with at least 8 font files. And then imagine you have different character sets. There's Latin, maybe you have one other, and that's now we're up to 16 different fonts that you might download. And it means that you have to make a choice about which ones you preload, which is the only. Sorry, I'm going on and on. But basically, I think frameworks do have an opportunity to make better choices about that. So we can, for example, I would like Nuxt Fonts to detect what characters are being used, so it can automatically subset for you, for example. I think that would be a really nice thing, so you don't have to do that yourself. And why not? If we can detect that, maybe we can detect exactly what fonts to preload.
My thought would be that you have a build, your build tool literally scans through your site and just builds your own fonts from all the sets that you've used, and only those. And of course, you can do that every commit or every every PR. That sounds to me like it would be the fastest way to approach things.
So the different CDN sometimes, so Google, for example, allows you to subset by appending a query parameter to the font. So you could do something. You're right. I agree, and that isn't implemented. But it is possible to do this. I think. No. If I do, what will I do? Families. It's obviously been too long. If I have a family like Poppins, I could say, what is it? Maybe I haven't merged it. But basically, I can specify, you can specify a specific character set for Google. And that, it's an experimental option. I'm sorry. I need to be, yeah. But yes, it's possible to do that. And I think it's a great idea to do it, part of the process.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, how's it going? Just a very simple question. What is it like to be involved in an open source framework? Just because it sounds quite interesting, and just by looking what you guys have done, it looks really interesting. That's pretty much my question.
Thank you. So obviously nobody here suffers from imposter syndrome.
Not at all.
Yeah. So imagine for a moment that I think you get imposter syndrome every time you're involved in something with other people who seem to have a great deal of skill in what that thing is. Now, if you're involved in building a framework, you are involved in a vast number of areas in which you're working with people who have a great deal of skill in the thing that you're talking about. So we work with, like, obviously you have to understand bundlers because we're working with Rollup, we're working with Webpack, with RSPack, roll down, stuff like that. So we're having to build plugins, we're having to understand the bundler ecosystem. We're obviously working with Vue, so we need to understand Vue under the hood, not just how you use it as a user, but sort of its internals. We're obviously working with providers. We have to understand how to deploy not just to AWS and Azure and so on, but in lots of different situations. We're working with Node and Bun and Dino as different JavaScript runtimes. And I could go on, but the impression I mean to leave is that it is one constant expression of feeling like an imposter all the time. And it is a lot of fun, because I think that when you're, I think that's how you learn and grow, is you're forced to do things you don't sort of have to figure out. And so I find it a lot of fun. But I don't want to give you the idea that everyone who's building frameworks is sort of an expert from the beginning. You know, it is a lot of fun. It is a lot of fun, but it is pretty daunting as well.
Thank you.
Anybody else got any other questions? Oh, sorry.
Thanks very much. Thanks for the talk. It was great. Just one thing, if you spent some time working on this, other than installing Nuxt fonts, if you're not using Nuxt, I was kind of thinking when you were talking about LCP, CLS, and INP, that as those metrics were introduced, there was always a sort of arms race of changing your approaches and architecture to try and, not game the stats, but get an edge in there. If you're looking at fonts, what's the thing that you could take away now that, other than obviously that package, that people should be working on to game, not to game the stats, but to get an edge that most people aren't doing?
So, I mean, nothing against getting an edge. Although I think in a lot of cases, it's about people want, we want performant websites, and someone says, "Oh, this thing is one way of measuring performance," and we think, "Oh, okay. How can we have a performant website on that?" So it's not necessarily like nobody's sitting out there sort of giving awards, but I think we get nerd sniped. We want to create better stuff. But fonts, I would say, add the fallback CSS. Use Fontaine is a package that hopefully you should be able to use whatever your framework. If not, open an issue and I'll try and make it work. There are websites where you can sort of specify the font, and it will give you some CSS that you can copy and paste. I don't know off the top of my head, but if you message me, I'll find it and send it to you, if you prefer to do something like that. I think that is basically, it adds a few lines of CSS to your site. It has, in my testing, I've seen it improve, take you from 70, 80 on a page speed, on a Lighthouse test to in the 90s, just by itself. Obviously, it really depends on the page and what the contributors to layout shift are. But it's almost no cost to do it. I think I would also move your fonts all local. Even if you're not using Nuxt fonts, download them, copy them to your public directory. That's going to be a much better setup for you than have them from a third party, both from a performance and a privacy point of view. And yeah, I mean, if you're going to go the extra mile, I would subset anything you're using as a pure heading font. You almost always find that there's an opportunity to cut it down. So, you're probably not using italics for your headings. You're probably using just the A to Z alphabet, probably. You probably don't even need accents and stuff like that. So why include it in the weight? So subset it. I think I sort of talked about all of those things, but I would definitely I would say those are the things that will improve your game on the fonts, from a fonts perspective.
Thanks very much. I really appreciate that. Just to follow on from what you said about the build tool, I've tried to run systems like that, and they hit you in the face a lot. So trying to run an automatic build tool that runs off you, because you get into the point, unless you've localized all of your content, how are you determining what that is? And then you're in different regions, and then so you end up, or at least whenever I've subsetted, it's just the heading on the homepage, and that's what you do. You do it manually, and then someone changes it, and then they forget. So, I would love a good bull tool for that, but I don't know.
The problem also don't keep your font on your system. So people often do this. They install the font, the web font that they're using on their computer, and then they don't see anything about what their website actually looks like to people who don't have it. So that is a very easy thing to get wrong. So if you have, because you can easily download Poppins or whatever as a TTF, so you copy it across, don't do that. You will not see if the subsetting fails. You will not see if there are other problems, like you might have more font weights available to you than your website has available to its visitors. So it's also a very, very easy win.
Thank you. Right, I think at that point, round of applause for Daniel again. Thank you very much. Next month, we'll be back. I think it's Tuesday, the 11th of February, and Christina will be talking about feature sliced design, which should be quite interesting. So looking forward to seeing you then. If you go to the Meetup group, please make sure you're an RSVP and keep your status up to date so we know how much pizza and drinks to buy. Come through to Edinburgh at some point. We're having a pub meetup next Tuesday, and we'll be announcing a programme hopefully in the next few weeks. Keep an eye on Scottish Technology Club, because the bulletin, I put all the details about the JavaScript events there, but also any other events. So if you're running an event, if you're making a blog, if you're making a portfolio website, give me a shout and I'll happily feature you in the email bulletin. Thank you for coming, everybody. We are going to the pub in town. Is it Hootenanny? Yeah, Hootenanny, I always forget the names of these places. Yeah, Hootenanny after, so yeah, just walk into town. It's by St. Enoch. So yeah, thanks for coming. Cheers.